Good morning.
Good morning.
I wasn't sure. Everything was so silent. I didn't know if I could hear anybody. How are you doing, Jane? Hi, Carson. I see Karen.
Good morning.
How are you?
Okie dokie.
Yeah, me too. My puppy
Oh, go
was
ahead.
Yeah, my puppy was sick all last night. So we were up and down with him. It was a mess. Like, let me just put it that way. It was a mess. So it was kind of like everybody's dragging over here.
Oh, I bet. Is he okay?
He's quiet, which is, so I just don't know if I should take him to the vet or not. I mean, we had multiple problems all night long, so actually Jack didn't even go swimming.
Yeah.
Taking a nap. I know.
Well, I think we won't have a few people. Emily is on leave from St. Anthony North. She's taking some PTO. And Kyle says he may not be on to begin with, but he'll come on around 8:30.
Okay.
I'm trying to think who else I heard from. Did you hear from anybody else, Carson?
Oh,
Right.
All right. Well, do we have a quorum though? If we do,
No.
otherwise we'll just jump over the approval of or the action items.
Yeah, let's give it a few more minutes here.
Sure.
Troy's on, Jessica's on. Okay. Deb's on. Jean's on. Okay.
Oh, I see Deb all of a sudden. Hi.
Oh, there's Ken. All right, you got a quorum.
Okay, cool. All right. Are you ready to start? Are we at 8 o'clock yet? I think we are.
Recording in progress.
Are we ready?
Whenever you are, Chair.
Oh, okay. I'd like to call the board Smart Commute Metro North board meeting to order. And Karen or Carson, would you call the roll, please? Whomever's.
We'll have to find the role.
All right.
Let's see. I see you, Chair Downing,
Yes.
Karen Stewart, Deb Durand, Jean Putman, Catherine Sanders from Smart Commute, Jessica Sandgren, Ken Spangler, Spencer Dodge with Front Range Passenger Rail, and Troy Whitmore.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Next is the approval of April 2021 minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review them? Are there any changes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Right. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, they're approved. Next is the treasurer's report. Karen?
Thanks very much, Chair. Sent out the treasurer's report yesterday, and as you can see, we're holding up here. We have a closing balance this month of $63,632.50 was the ending balance, and that doesn't include the $30,000 in our savings. So we have close to $100,000. And we will be buying down that savings as we are required to put in local match for the Flex Ride and the e-bike program. Wanted to let you know that I'll be sending out the June membership renewals for most of the members who renewed during the summer last year. So next month you'll see membership renewals in the report. I think the only thing that's significant to report is that you will have an update today from Jean Shreve, the program manager of the e-bikes program. And I have an invoice from Giant Bikes for $21,000 that will be coming out of next month's account, but should be reimbursed right away by Colorado Energy Office. So it shouldn't be an out-of-pocket cost for very long. And then I made a decision yesterday to purchase an e-bike for Smart Commute. One of the reasons we did that was because Jean, as the program manager, was offered the loan of one of our grant bikes to use it and experience it and use it as a teaching tool. And I felt pretty uncomfortable about using the grant bike as a teaching tool bike and then down the road giving it to someone as a used bike. So we just decided that we would buy a bike. It's $2,100. And it will be a staff bike. It will be available to anybody on the staff to use it and use it as a promotional tool and as a teaching tool. It's interesting, maybe Jean will tell you about her experience going down to Centennial, picking up the bike and taking the bike back up to where she lives in Thornton, using transit all the way, transit and her leg power and the e-power. It took her about 2 hours. And she experienced some things. She experienced that they're very heavy to lift, even for someone who's fit like she is, to lift onto the RTD light rail, the N line, and the bus, all of those. And so as she does her travel training, she's probably going to see if she can coordinate with the Flex Ride at some of her outreaches to have people try to put their bikes on the Flex Ride to see how easy or not easy it is for them to do that. So we're excited about that, and she'll tell you about that. But those are the big expenses that you'll see in next month. We finally got the NADA dues and the NADA administrative fees. And so our current balance as of today is $49,088, and then the $30,000 in savings, so $79,000. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? I don't hear,
Alrighty, thank you.
yeah, I don't hear any
So
questions.
you'll want a motion to accept, yeah.
Yeah, so I need a motion to accept the treasurer's report, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second, Whitmore.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, just a comment, on our agenda, it says to acceptance of the May treasurer's report, and I think it should be April. That's just on our agenda though, so. Did you see that, Karen?
Yeah, we accepted the April one last month.
So
So
we're
it would
gonna-
be the May's,
Okay, all right, we're good.
yeah, it'd be the May treasurer's report.
It's just kind of like.
May
I-
1st
I'm always-
treasurer's report, yeah.
I'm always a month behind on the approval end of it, All right, so let's do updates, and I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'll just do the first one. It's the employee trip reduction program that's under the rulemaking process right now. And I know ACE Rep had a presentation by CDPHE in early May by someone from CDPHE, but I did the presentation for the Broomfield Chamber because it happened to be the same day that the rulemaking was starting, and everyone from CDPHE and the AQCC were busy doing that, and so did a presentation for the Broomfield Chamber. And I think it's because we don't know all the rules yet. I think it was more an informational presentation that spoke about what we know and what we don't know. And until the rules come out, we won't know as much. But Catherine has been very engaged in all the meetings. She's engaged in some of the logistics of survey and how the program's going to roll out. And I will just turn it over to Catherine to say anything that she feels is pertinent as this rolls forward. She's our representative with the Way to Go program at DRCOG in some of the many meetings that they've had, talking about toolkits available for employers and how TMOs like us can provide the kinds of assistance that employers of 100 and more are going to need as this rolls out and the requests are there. So I'm going to go off camera and turn it over to Catherine. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Yes, Smart Commute has been very involved with the E-Trip ETRP process as an, I guess, influencer, especially an expert influencer. We have groups with us in the TMA that is drafting some rule language changes in order to make sure that it's going to work and make sense. We continue, I think, to advocate for some changes in the rule. I'm not sure that we're going to see things like differentiated goals based on the location of an employer. I'm not sure that we're going to see that change, but we're advocating for it. We have made a lot of changes, recommended changes, I should say, to the rule language pertaining to how employers are going to need to keep track of like the survey data and how they're going to be calculating their SOV rate and things like that. So that's been where I've been very involved, is all of the survey and data aspects of the rule. And Tammy and I have been kind of covering meetings, as well as Carson, on how we're going to be preparing to support employers if the rule is in fact implemented at the end of August. If everything moves forward according to schedule, which there's all indications that it will at the state level, then we will be looking at the rule enacting requirements as of January 1st. So large employers will need to self-register at that time. And then there's several different deadlines leading up to needing to have some survey results by April 1st, and then an actual ETRP plan, E-Trip plan, submitted by July 1st next year. So those are all of the timeframes that we're looking at. And we did learn about penalties and for employers that are not in compliance. And it's going to continue to be pretty vague, but the Air Quality Control Commission is enabled to fine up to $47,000 per day. And that is the upper limit, and that is for any air quality violation. That includes like violations at the power plants, for instance. So I don't think that we'd be looking at that kind of fining. And they're going to be very reluctant to specifying what kind of fines they're going to be implementing or imposing on out of compliance companies. But out of their mouths at these meetings, they're looking to be flexible with companies, and they really want to work with companies. They're trying to go more carrot rather than stick. But again, they're not going to come out with language making that promise either. So they're specifying it in these meetings, but otherwise are not going to be giving any kind of support to or comfort to companies, if that makes any sense at all. But we did find out finally there isn't going to be fines specified in the rule language itself, because they're already enabled by legislation to fine overall across the board on any air quality violation. So that was kind of recent news that we we're able to track down. And if there's any questions about anything, I'm happy to try to answer. There's still a lot of uncertainty. And Karen, when she presented to the Broomfield Chamber just last week, we were able to present knowns and unknowns. And while the unknowns list is starting to get a little bit smaller, there's still a lot of things on that list that we just are not sure about yet. But if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer it. Otherwise, we are continuing to be very involved in the E-Trip process as an influencer, as an advocate, I guess, for businesses as well as TDM experts. So we have a lot to offer in this area.
So Catherine, and I may have missed it, you were talking about the penalties for air quality pollution. How are they going to determine who is the violator? I mean, and what percent of that?
So the out of compliance is reasonably clear. If you go 3 years and you have not hit a initially 75% SOV rate with your business, and you do that for 3 years, then you are technically out of compliance and you're in violation. The rule language says, they are willing to look at kind of other options that an employer can pursue to reduce their overall CO2 emissions. So like equipment upgrades in lieu of making that goal. But that's the violation as of right now, is if you do not hit that 75%, and it's moving to 60% in 3 years. So I think it's 2025 after the rule is imposed. I think it's 2025 that it's a 60% SOV rate. And this is across the board for all companies. This is something that the TMAs almost universally are all advocating against, this uniform goal, because first of all, downtown's already in compliance for most companies because they have the supportive infrastructure. So the downtown companies aren't going to have to do very much versus companies that are out of, an infrastructure supported rich environment, like, much of the north area, we are going to have significant difficulties meeting those thresholds. So that is clear as far as what is in compliance and what is not in compliance. What they're not being super forthright about is how they're going to be fining or penalizing these companies. Out of their mouths, they're wanting to be flexible, but they're not putting anything in writing. Obviously, nothing is going to be in the rule about flexibility. Other areas have good faith effort written into their rules. We have not heard any indication from the state folks at CDPHE that they're willing to insert that good faith language into the rule. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty and unknown, and I know that makes businesses exceptionally uncomfortable. So I think, Jean, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, my question is, they've got 3 years that they failed to meet compliance. Are they informed on a yearly basis of that?
So annual surveying is required by the rule, which we feel is pretty onerous. We were advocating for every other year being sufficient, but the state folks are really adamant about wanting annual surveying to take place. And in order to meet the rule, you need to have 75% response rate on that survey. So businesses are going to have to incentivize employees to take these surveys in order to keep track of the data. If they don't make a 75% threshold, basically the gap is assumed to be SOV drivers. So it's really in the best interest of an employer to get as much response as possible so they can capture anyone that is commuting by non-SOV mode.
Another question is, this goes to the commission. Is there an annual list of people who are not in compliance?
I am not certain how they're going to make that accessible. There will be, as far as the state staff, the Air Pollution Control Division, they are going to have a listing. Everyone's reporting data to them. I'm not sure if they're going to turn around and make that publicly accessible or not. I really am not sure as far as trying to hold companies publicly accountable. Not certain about that.
The reason I ask is I think if the public knows that somebody has not been in compliance, there can be some peer pressure and vocal outreach to get them to be in compliance.
That is true. I really am not sure. I think that there's probably pros and cons to making that list publicly available. It may in fact be an open records request type of data point anyway, where people could get the data if they needed to. I'm not sure. That is not something that I've thought a lot about, and we haven't discussed that level of how that information is going to be shared. So it looks like Troy and then Jessica.
Good morning. I've got a lot of questions. I'll try and boil them down. So you said there's really no effort to understand the lack of options in attainment areas that are more suburban or rural, such as Thornton or Brighton. Maybe if we had a better RTD rep up this way, we would be more suitably served, but there's nothing to any of my offices as far as bus stops, things like that. Employees spread all over 3 counties. What a nightmare. So with that question or that thought in mind, is there any productive lobbying that can be done between now and the August timeframe for their final, or is it just sit back and take it and monitor and see what we can do? And I got a couple of real quick follow-up questions. I don't want to eat into all of Jessica's time either.
Well, I can tell you that they are prepared to receive a lot of negative input on this. So, and it does not sound like they're going to be very responsive to that negative feedback. They are kind of saying they are moving out of a listening stage into a stage of just being proponents of the rule. And so I'd say they are looking for people who want to support the rule but have concerns. Now, we know that it's very difficult for businesses to take any kind of stance of support on this, but that's a way of starting to, I think, reach the ears of both the staff that are going to be administering this, as well as the Air Quality Control Commission, who are basically the board that's going to be allowing this to go into place. There is something called party status that Smart Commute is going to be pursuing, and it might be something that some businesses can pursue as well. We are trying to better understand what that means. That status will allow Smart Commute to influence some of the rule in a way that we would not otherwise be able to as like a public comment. That might be something that we can collect more information about and then report it out. We've been trying to track down all of the information we can on party status, but they're not at the deadline yet, and they haven't been very transparent about getting that out. If anyone here understands party status already, we'd love to hear your experience with it. But otherwise, that is something that we're looking at putting together for our organization, and it might be something that other companies can pursue as well. We know that the universities are all pursuing party status. We talked to someone at Adams 12 and said, it might be possible for the schools to band together to go after party status because they have very, very unique situations when it comes to commuting. That's something that we can come back and explain a little further. We have time before party status has to be declared. So I can commit to trying to get that information together. And if, like, for instance, United Power would be the kind of company that could look to get party status, I can confirm that is the case. Otherwise, I think your best bet is really working with us as Smart Commute, and we have been advocating for having a lower I guess there'd be a higher SOV threshold here in rural and suburban areas. And our out of compliance or out of conformance, the zone that this is going to cover, it goes all the way up to like Fort Collins, and there's a little bit of like Estes Park included even. So it's very, very rural areas. We are not the only ones voicing significant concern about that goal of 75% and then moving to 60% as the goal. And we do have concerns about the fact that downtown, these companies are already just inherently meeting these goals. And it'd be nice if we all had to stretch in a reasonable fashion to meet this goal, rather than the suburbs are having to stretch a lot, and it's going to be almost unattainable, I think, versus downtown companies might not have to do anything at all. That does not seem fair. And there's a lot of voices saying that is the case, but I think it gets down to the devil in the details about drawing the lines on the map. I really think that's where a lot of people are reluctant to have differentiated goals. So we completely understand your concern, and that's being reflected by all the companies that are cited outside of downtown for sure.
Well, I appreciate that, Catherine. And I have talked to Karen briefly about
And we can break up the
application to our
summary portion.
senior management team. So we're preparing appropriately. So, and I've got a couple dates I'll shoot over to Karen. It might be Catherine or Carson or whoever. But we'd sure like to know a little bit more about planning stages. And then quick question, is it true that there is credit for employees driving electric or hybrid vehicles? Is it true there would be credit for our fleet vehicles that we're slowly moving to electric, as quickly as we can afford to and as quickly as they work? I mean, it's one thing to drive a passenger car, but another thing to have a bucket truck. You don't want the batteries to run out when you got a guy in the air 25 feet. So, but we're getting there. And then the other thing is, it's a double whammy in the power industry. I mean, we've got Senate Bill 200 moving, ramping things up beyond what the governor wanted. And it seems like it would be helpful if we get any credit for what we're doing in our communities. We just opened another charging station out in Keensburg of all places. So we have range anxiety put to bed between Fort Morgan and Brighton, if you will. It'd be nice if some of those would be considered. Perhaps it's under 200 or the other greenhouse gas goals, but it's a double whammy for companies that are, 30 miles from Denver is a hell of a lot different than 0.3 of a mile from Denver to your point. So, okay.
Yeah.
That up and good for you folks. I'm going to a board meeting pretty soon, but thank you so much. This is helpful.
Yeah, to your question, EVs, if an employee is commuting by 100% EV vehicle, that does reduce the SOV rate. It basically counts as no vehicle arriving to the workplace when you do the calculation. Second question about all of the work that United Power is doing to reduce emissions. You could, if you can quantify that, you can propose it in an alternative compliance plan. That's in the rule. So start kind of trying to document the kind of emissions that you're reducing. Now, the one thing I can't confirm is if you're making that progress today, if they're going to count it when the rule is in place. That's worth a discussion. If you're doing things that have an annual reduction, however, I think there's an argument to be made that even though you maybe you made the investment now in this year, that it should still count because you're continually reducing emissions. So I just wanted to address those really fast. And it looks like Jessica's the last question. And I'm really sorry. This is a lot, everyone.
No, thanks, Catherine. I think it's helpful to hear that. It's frustrating. Not only is it a double whammy, I think it's a triple whammy, because for those of us up north who have been reaching out to these companies to build their businesses or bring their businesses to our cities, basically they're going to get dinged because they can't comply with this. We have no opportunity. We know we have 50% or more of our residents do not have access to transit. And so now we're going to say, oh, by the way, big employment centers who will be a primary employer for us, sorry, we don't fit into, we're not close enough to get any of this access. So you probably want to look closer to Denver. So I think it's ridiculous, and it hurts our cities up here in a lot of ways, but is there any sort of financial incentive for any of these businesses or financial help for those of us who don't live in an area where there is transit, or even companies who have work trucks, parents who have one vehicle? I just don't see how this is ever going to work with anything up here. And then just publicly shame businesses, I would never support anything like that, because it's going to be hard enough for them to afford, let alone, number one, just trying to comply, but number two, all the other fees that we're going to be tasked. This is just unbelievable that what's going on this year. I don't know what else to say. I feel like we're really putting our state and our businesses in a very bad position.
It's tough. And we are hearing all of what you're saying from so many different companies. As far as having financial incentives, I think a number of people are looking for that, and there might be some funding in the works, but it wouldn't come from CDPHE. It'd be coming from other avenues. And I don't know if that's something Karen wanted to address at all, but nothing. So if we're going to go with what exists today, there is no funding to help support like a carrot approach with companies. There's nothing for that. And there's no plan for like fines to feed into, we're finding some companies in order to incentivize others. Nothing like that has been discussed. So there might be some things in the works, but nothing has happened as of right now to help provide support to companies, aside from, us helping them with our expert help and our expert knowledge when it comes to reducing SOV rates at the organizational level. And I've personally been really working on the calculation side to make sure that we can calculate the SOV rate as we can reduce it as much as possible, like counting things like vacation days. Those should help reduce the SOV rate, because only 83% of an average company is actually getting people onto site. Other people are on sick, on vacation, or just aren't reporting to the work place that day, and we should not include those. Those should reduce the SOV rate. So that kind of work is happening. Karen, I see your hand up. I don't know if we're going over time at all.
I guess, yeah, I think the more information we can get, our economic development department, again, it just hurts our cities when we try to bring in these primary employers to our communities, and then they're basically going to have to invest a ton of more money into either purchasing EVs, which is out of reach for most of us. I don't know in what world we live in where the governor, all these people think that we're all driving electric vehicles, but we're not. And then if you have to drive long distances, it's not feasible. So it's just really frustrating. And I know, Catherine, your job must not be real pleasant right now either, trying to figure this out. So I'm not going to speak anymore, but thank you.
We're doing our best. We completely agree with all the comments that we're hearing. We want to have attainable goals. We do want to see progress as an organization, but it's going to be very difficult. And it's going to be frightening for all of the companies that are outside of the downtown, like Central Business District. Frankly, they're going to be the only companies that can just breathe a sigh of relief, and that just is inherently unfair. So Karen, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Catherine. I have to tell you, Smart Commute's thrilled to have Catherine on board to help us with the analysis and figuring out what the appropriate survey should be, appropriately how to decide what SOV rate is and all of that. But I do want to say not to panic too much, because we do think this is a good move forward in the long run. 27 other areas of the country have these kinds of programs in place. And so there's some models out there, some templates out there that these kinds of programs can work. There's a toolbox available to reduce SOV that will fit some businesses, won't fit others. Flex work, compressed work week, telework, transit, carpool, vanpool, all of those kinds of things. To Troy's comment about needing more transit, I do believe that one way to reduce greenhouse gas is to improve the transit system. And I think particularly if there were money available to RTD to improve the transit system in areas that don't have robust transit like our area. That's important. In the new transportation bill, there's $184 million in there, I believe, that's for assistance in the non-attainable area that we live in, to do some programs or some probably some grant mechanisms to maybe do something like we did with the Flex Shuttle. So just want to say that we're here. We're here to help out. One of the things we're doing that might be of interest to the rest of you is that we're working with St. Anthony North. We've just recently had an overview from the Regional Air Quality Council on their EV charging stations grant program. And it's a significant grant program. And we're working with Emily over at St. Anthony North to help them determine what their needs will be for EV chargers. And that's one way you meet the SOV as well. Not just if you have an EV, but if you put in chargers, that's another notch on the criteria of reducing SOV. So don't want you to panic, just want you to be aware. And if you have significant suggestions relating to your company, we want you to tell AQCC what they are, because as they wrote this rule or started to write this rule, they didn't ask any of us to begin with, and we forced ourselves, we the TMOs in the Denver metro region who do this kind of work day in and day out, we forced them to listen to us about not all companies are the same. Transit isn't the same everywhere you go. The kinds of jobs, warehouse jobs, industry jobs, service jobs, logistics jobs, so many different kinds. As far as we know, agriculture is the only industry that is exempt from having to do this. But I'm hoping that they hear from enough other that see that one size doesn't fit all. And they say they'll be flexible, so we want to make sure they are flexible. So, and I see Kyle has his hand up, and then we should probably move on to the next agenda item. But this is an important discussion we're having today. Thank you.
This will be really quick. Apologies for joining the meeting late. I think I've understood that there is no adjustments to the trip reduction plans based upon existence of transit at this point. It is one size fits all. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
at this point, they're not treating anyone differently.
Yikes. Okay, thank you.
All right.
And
before we move
I wanted
on,
to,
Go ahead.
I wanted to mention police officers are also not going to be included in the calculation. As far as I can read in the rule, it says people that need to drive a vehicle for security and emergency purposes, and I'm guessing maybe firemen as well, would not count. They wouldn't be included when their company's SOV rate is being calculated. So that'll help the cities a little bit.
And speaking of which, I understood politicians were exempted. So not only are we full of hot air, we're polluting with hot air. That's a damn shame.
All right. Are there any questions before we move on? All right. Thank you, Catherine. A lot of information. I am still concerned. I'm very concerned about what's coming down the pike. So please keep us informed, and thanks for all your hard work. Thank you. Okay, next we have Bike to Summer program.
I'll take this one, Chair, as we kind of roll through the rest of our updates here. I just wanted to provide an extremely brief update. This is taking us back to a lighter side of things in ETRP, which is big and scary and detailed. So we have obviously some upcoming events. I think the only changes from last month really are that the baseline event coming up on June 5th has this great flyer. We'll be there as one of the sponsors. Tammy will be the person on our staff there. But it sounds like a great event, and we would encourage, if any of you want to come out and support Smart Commute, you can do that. And there's a lot of great activities happening that day, besides everything that we're offering, that we've been offering throughout Bike to Summer. Our first in-person event that we're attending is, Catherine and I are attending tonight, is the North Glen Full Moon Bike Ride. We're really excited about that. We'll see what the turnout's like, but looking forward to getting out there and talking to folks, even if it's 5 or 10 folks, we don't care. It's just exciting to get back out there and be on a bike tonight. So that's happening. The baseline thing is going forward, and Sorting Through Thornton has been moved until a little bit early July. We expect it to be in June, but of course, things are changing so quickly right now in all of our lives that they've pushed that back to July a little bit, and we'll be sponsoring a bike light giveaway for one of their scavenger hunt events that's centered around exploring a Thornton bike trail. So more to come on this throughout the summer. Just wanted to provide an update and say we're looking forward to all of these events. And if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll take questions as we go and just kind of keep rolling through the updates.
Yes, please do.
Great. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. I'll keep an eye on the boxes here, but we have some upcoming community outreach activities as well. We're going to do Broomfield's National Night Out later this summer, and I'll be working with Circle Graphics as one of our employers. It's not a community outreach, but it's an in-person outreach for one of their recycling events in late June, a couple of day-long event that we're really looking forward to. All really to say that we're looking for community outreach opportunities as things open back up, and we're looking forward to, going to things like Thornton Fest and all those big events as things are safe now, and we're looking forward to all those opportunities. Yesterday, I was able to go and record a physical therapist who's an expert in wellness and ergonomics for our Wellness and Ergonomics Can Do Colorado telework grant, a small grant that you all know that we were approved for a month or so ago. And I was finally able to get in and record those 3 videos, one on ergonomics, one on physical wellness, and one on mental wellness, as they focus on teleworking as people continue to do that, as most of us are doing that right now. We have some really great tips. We're excited for those to come out. So stay tuned as we start partnering with the Broomfield Chamber and getting those videos out. I'm sure the board will see those as soon as possible. I think in the interest of time, Chair, I'll take questions, of course, but if not, we'll go ahead and pass it on to Front Range Rail, whoever wants to introduce them, you or Karen.
Before we move on, are there any more questions? Okay, thank you very much, Carson. Sounds like it's going to be a fun summer. All right, Karen, Front Range Passenger.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Jim Suby. I've known Jim for quite a long time, and he is the chair of the Front Range Passenger Rail Commission. As you know, prior to this year, there was quite a lot of stakeholder outreach on Front Range Passenger Rail, and Smart Commute participated in much of that outreach. We participated in the northern area and the Denver metro area, and a lot of things have been moving forward. There seems to be quite a bit of traction with putting in a regional rail system, and we're excited to hear from Jim today to tell us more about what's happening and maybe touch on the special district legislation that is moving through the legislature now in order to provide more momentum to this this exciting opportunity. Jim, welcome to Smart Commute. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Karen. Can you hear me? I want to make sure that I'm loud and clear.
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Thank you.
super. Thank you, Carson. Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you, members of the board. We're delighted to be here. I'm going to turn this presentation over to our staff director, Spencer Dodge, who does most of our public liaison. He'll run through a brief summary of the project, where we stand now, and then I'll present to you the current situation around our legislation, which is, in fact, moving forward through the legislature. So if it's okay with you, Karen, let me turn this over to Spencer.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, I'm here. Yeah, as Jim mentioned, my name is Spencer Dodge. I am not, thank you for the promotion, Jim, but I'm not the director of the commission. I'm just the liaison so far.
You deserve one.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to give a quick update. If we can go to the next slide, I think there's an outline of kind of what we're going to talk about. Yeah. So just a real brief update on kind of what we've accomplished over the last couple of years, what we've been doing and what we plan on doing over the next 12 to 18 months. I'm going to discuss briefly an MOU that we've been working on between the Rail Commission, CDOT, and RTD to address West Rail. And then I'll turn it over to Jim to kind of talk about Senate Bill 238. And if we can figure out Amtrak's plan, I'm not sure if you can take that slide, but next slide, please. So this slide kind of lays out where we've been and where we're going. If you look on the left there, these are some of the accomplishments that we've kind of knocked out over the last 2 years. We've developed a long-term vision for the project, looking at Pueblo all the way up to Fort Collins. We've done a preliminary environmental review, getting us ready for that NEPA process that we anticipate coming up. We've done some ridership modeling using CDOT's statewide transportation ridership modeling program. Really helpful information there. We've done some conceptual high-level cost estimations as well as engineering and design efforts. And we completed a preliminary alternatives analysis, and a lot of these things kind of fed into that alternatives analysis. That's about an 88-page document with some appendices that really kind of is that first step in kind of determining what is feasible and what's not, and what we can carry forward into NEPA to eventually get this passenger service running. And then we have also done some funding and finance analysis at a very high level again. And finally, as mentioned previously, we've done some extensive stakeholder engagement and public involvement efforts over the last couple of years. So with all of that behind us, we are also looking towards the future. We've got a couple of different efforts that are underway. The first being the Southwest Chief through car alternatives analysis. This is a little bit outside of the Metro North area, down south, looking at the Southwest Chief service that runs through Trinidad, La Junta, and then down into New Mexico. We're really kind of looking at as kind of a first stage or a first implementable stage for front-range passenger rail is looking at how we can move that Southwest Chief service north into Pueblo or even up to Colorado Springs. And so that through car alternatives analysis is kind of the first stage in looking at how we can make that happen. That's funded through a CRISI grant that we were able to acquire with the help of some community partners, as well as CDOT and the Rail Commission. We were able to get a second CRISI grant last year, and that's to fund this front-range passenger rail simulation modeling and preliminary service development planning. And again, these are just kind of those next steps to really building out kind of the basis, doing the homework, if you will, for eventual deeper review. This is again kind of building out what that service looks like, how many trains per day, how often the service going to be, where is that service going to be located, so kind of adding more meat to the bones of this project. And then kind of the final two big items that are always at the top of our mind are securing short and long-term funding for the Rail Commission. It's always a big question is how are we going to keep the lights on and keep the project momentum moving. And then finally, governance. That's kind of being addressed right now at the Capitol, and I'll hold off on saying more about that until Jim's slide. Next slide, please. So this is kind of one of the big things that I've been working on over the last probably 6 to 8 weeks now. Many of you know that RTD is again going to be looking at Northwest Rail and kind of that peak service operations planning. And we're also kind of doing the same exact process, albeit on a much bigger scale, but still within the same corridor. So we really want to make sure that we're cooperating amongst our study and with their study to make sure that we can come up with a single kind of integrated operating plan. And this was really kind of spurred on by the Class 1 railroads. They said, hey, you guys are both looking at the same area, make sure you're aligned and, you're not doing anything that contradicts each other or makes anything impossible for the other parties. So really trying to be strategic in our planning and kind of data sharing. So we're all working from the same information. That includes operations and engineering design and some of those ridership numbers. So also aligning our stakeholder engagement in media communications. With this kind of project, there can be some confusion on who's doing what and what party is responsible for what. So I want to be as clear as possible here. And also kind of convening leadership and executive oversight capacity to make sure that, the left hand, it can't be doing anything that the right hand can't see. We want to make sure everybody's on the same page here. So beyond just kind of the alignment in right-of-way and service areas of Longmont, Boulder, and Denver, there's a lot of similarities between these two studies. We're both trying to provide a different mode choice beyond just driving your car or riding a bus on the road, essentially, right? And really want to make sure that we can come up with a reliable trip, no matter the weather, no matter the time of day, things like this. And stakeholders, of course, are all going to be very similar amongst the corridor, and the engineering is going to be kind of very similar to the point that we really need to stay connected. Really kind of where we're looking at here is, the operator who's going to be running this passenger service. What kind of technology is this going to be? A diesel locomotive or an electric? Is this light rail or bigger, more built-out intercity passenger rail? What does that schedule look like? What are the number of stations? Where are those stations? Where is a maintenance yard? So again, kind of that operations, operating plan, service plan. What is this service going to look like? Next slide, please. and I think I should mention this, please interrupt me if you have questions. I won't take offense to it. And as I say that, Jim Subi's slide here. Jim, I'll let you go ahead and talk about 238 for a minute.
Okay, I think I'm back live. I think you all know that there is a bill pending before the legislature, Senate Bill 21-238. It has bipartisan sponsorship, and it's a very comprehensive piece of legislation that both creates a district, and you see it depicted on the right-hand side. It creates a board of directors, both voting and non-voting. And it also empowers the district, the board, to do those, carry out whatever they need to, essentially, in order to construct and operate a passenger rail system. We went out and looked at 7 other states, including our own, of course, RTD, but we looked at a number of other states to pick up what those powers are, what's necessary, and put that into the bill. Our leadership, legislative leadership, put it into the bill. The board, let me first describe the corridor. It includes the 4 MPO councils of government, principally the MPO areas, because they're the main market area for this service. And then where you do not have a planning organization, we have a corridor about 10 miles wide that follows I-25. And you can see that the corridor runs from the Wyoming border to the New Mexico border, and the legislation does allow the governors of Wyoming and New Mexico to appoint non-voting members. I might add that they participate currently in the current commission. So they're pretty much on board with this whole concept and looking forward to this service. The board has 17 voting members, of which 10 are appointed, have to be elected or formally elected officials appointed by the metropolitan planning organizations. 6 voting members are appointed by the governor, including 2 who represent environmental interests, 1 who represents environmental interests and 1 who represents organized labor interests. It currently has in the draft legislation 7 non-voting members. We added I-70 to the group yesterday, or the legislature did, I should say. We've been coordinating and cooperating with them on the commission, and it made great sense to have them noted to be a cooperating organization in our legislation. We also have the 2 Class 1 railroads, Amtrak, RTD, also have non-voting members. Let's see. It empowers the district, as I said, and probably the most, controversial issue in the legislation is the fact that it can send to the voters, if 2/3 of the voting directors agree, it can present to the voters a ballot initiative for a sales tax to fund and the construction of the system and its operations. That is limited to a maximum 0.8% of sales tax. We haven't done enough analysis yet to understand exactly where that might fall, but we limited it at the high end. And as you might imagine, that's the piece of this legislation that has the most political interest. But so far, the legislature has moved this bill forward. It also has the powers to condemn property. All these rail systems do. It's rarely used, if ever, but it's extremely necessary if you're going to have a system that can be unimpeded and travel border to border. The condemnation authority requires that the district cooperate with the local government, that it maintain and cooperate with respect to their land use regulations, and that that this must be carried out in cooperation. This also applies to station areas. And although the legislation has named a number of communities, which you can see depicted on this right of way, only the final analysis, the NEPA analysis and the service development plan that we will be required to carry out in order to qualify for federal funding, That's where the final decisions on station locations and the services we will provide will take place. We are gaining momentum. Yesterday, Boulder County joined in endorsing the legislation. The city of Colorado Springs yesterday joined in endorsing legislation. So we're beginning to pick up local momentum. The reason for that, in part, is that one of the areas the commission is focused on is how do we cooperate and interconnect with local transit services. And that'll be very important to the success of this service. So it's very important that that be a part of this upcoming service development plan. The last thing I'll say about the legislation is it does receive, the district would receive funding, the commission would receive funding until the district is formed. If this legislation should pass this year, most appointments must be made by December of this year, and the first meeting of the commission would be in May of 2022. So that's a short timeline. We're hoping it does pass. We're hoping this district gets formed because in Washington, D.C., the window for significant federal funding is opening a bit with some bipartisan support. Now we understand Amtrak was on a train with the House leadership yesterday. They're a part of this commission, and they have named this line as one of their top priorities for future funding. They recognize that in order to get a line like this funded or constructed and operated, those front end costs have to be dealt with and mitigated to whatever extent possible. So we're looking forward to a very cooperative and positive relationship with them. And the last thing I'll say about this is our railroad partners are taking this very seriously now as this legislation moves forward. We're having monthly meetings with the BNSF Railway, RTD, CDOT, and the commission. And we're actually now discussing how this system would operate if it does, in fact, fall on a freight rail right of way. And that is the preferred, I guess, Spencer's already mentioned that, but this is the preferred route that the commission will send forward to the district, but it is not the final decision. Only the NEPA analysis and service development plan will depict what the final right of way will be. However, I will say that we know from Amtrak's point of view, the way, and if they're going to be a major funder, then they are to some extent driving this situation. We know that their operating preferences are to operate either on their own owned right of way, which they do in, of course, the Northeast Corridor, or on a freight right of way. And they have federal legislation that enables them to operate on a freight right of way and receive preference in terms of scheduling and what have you. Karen, with that, let me stop on the legislation and what it's setting forward and see if there are any questions. Let me first, Spencer, is there anything else you need to add here?
No, I would just mention that, you briefly mentioned it and I kind of hinted at it that, the Rail Commission did kind of take a vote to recommend that Northwest Rail alignment. And I believe that language is also kind of tentatively written into Senate Bill 21238 as a preference. So that, just a little more teeth there.
Right. Well, I think, and Karen probably remembers this, but when we met with the Transportation Commission, I pointed out that we needed to be transparent about what was happening. But these meetings are going on. We have received federal funding with matching funds to model this corridor more specifically. So it was something we needed to make sure voters and obviously our legislators understand.
All right, I see some questions. Jessica and then Jean.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I think, it's all very interesting as we move through this process. And overall, I think, getting cars off the road to get on that passenger rail will be a good thing. Just FYI, our city did come out unanimously last night in opposition of that enterprise, unless amended, because we know that even if the majority of our city votes on a tax increase, votes it down, that if the majority of the MPO area does approve it, that we will still be required to pay. And so, we would like to see some changes in that just so that, you know, if our voters decide they don't want to pay into it, that they're not forced to, because outside forces that do actually have access to it are making those decisions for us. So I think it's an interesting concept, but we would love to see some amendments to that to at least have the ability to take our city and other cities who decide not to pay into it, give them the ability to do so.
Well,
Thanks, Jessica.
I presented to the city council last night, and I heard their arguments loud and clear. Really would fall within the catchment area for a rail service, but you know, we're going to pass on. I know Greeley's going to send their concerns on to the legislature, if I understood the outcome last night. So, you know, quite frankly, the commission, we're deeply involved in this with respect to a lot of the technical aspects, but we're not deeply involved in this with respect to a lot of the political aspects. I can assure you, we have a lot of elected leaders on the commission, and they are engaged locally, but we've been kind of advised as a state agency that we can provide information and education and all the rest, but we don't jump in and lobby. That's pretty much forbidden under state law for a state entity. So I appreciate
Yeah, I
it.
understand that, James. I think it's just a matter of, we want to make sure our voice is heard at every possible, you know, everywhere we can, because we really don't feel like it is being heard. So I understand. Thank you.
Jean?
Mr. Scobie and Mr. Dodge. I was on the Rocky Mountain Rail Authority many years ago looking at rail within the state of Colorado. And I want to see this happen. And I was very concerned, and I'm going to express concerns that Jessica brought up, that going up on the Northwest Rail is the slow boat that'll be time consuming because of the number of crossings and what have you going up between all of those cities. Back many years ago, the reason the I-25 alignment was picked was because you had the Boulder, you had the Longmonts, the Lovelands, the Fort Collins, the Greeleys, and everybody buying. So they decided to go and pick one that went up between them. I think that was a good idea then. I think it's a good idea now. I think having it go up through on the BN line, I think there needs to be a line to Boulder and Longmont. But to go further than that, it's going to be a drag on the timing of rail service and positive outcome for the traveler. I think you need to parallel I-25. You'll have fewer crossings, and I think that way you can have this kind of like an hourglass that people come out to I-25 and then go south on I-25. My second point is I was very concerned that the diagrams I've seen shows it stopping at Pueblo. I would like to see it extend the 85 miles from Pueblo to Trinidad so that you can make a connection to the Southwest Chief. That would then connect 3 state capitals and be a mechanism for people to get around and go down to like Albuquerque and Santa Fe and what have you, and people from New Mexico to come up, I think you're being short-sighted not going down to Trinidad. And the drawings I have seen do not show that. I've done a drawing that I handed to Karen, and I've sent it to a lot of representatives of that 85-mile extension down to Trinidad. I want to see the rail, but I think you're trying to play too many favorites with local governments, and you need to think about the overall effectiveness of the system in going along I-25.
Yeah.
End of my
Karen,
comments.
may I reply, Karen?
Go ahead.
No,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you, Gene. I was also, you may remember, was on the Bob Briggs's group for 3 or 4 years back when. I recall that. We learned from CDOT, and Spencer may want to chime in, that there was only a 37-foot right-of-way on the I-25 corridor. So we would have to actually extend out from the corridor, from the highway corridor. And that would, in fact, be no different than, in fact, expanding that highway, which would be extremely expensive. Now, we did model the I-25 route. We looked at it. The route we chose is competitive in terms of speed and service. And it's more than competitive in terms of ridership. So this route was not selected on a whim by a long shot. As Spencer pointed out, we did essentially a preliminary environmental linkage analysis on would be the best routes to carry forward. And we would not have selected. The legislation, by the way, requires us to be able to operate at speeds of 90 to 100 miles an hour, or we won't build the line. So we're going to be competitive, requires us to be competitive with any other mode in the district. So these ideas have governed this legislation, and the commission has recommended these ideas. One other thing, our current legislation and the new legislation requires us to consider Trinidad and to eventually run this service all the way down to Trinidad through Walsenburg. That 85-mile segment we have walked and looked at. It will be an expensive addition. We're hoping, and our legislation does direct us currently, and will direct the new commission, board, to look at rerouting the Southwest Chief through Pueblo. If that were to be the case, then we could obtain additional federal funding for the Pueblo to Walsenburg to Trinidad route and on down to New Mexico. So, we've thought about these issues. For example, we challenged Amtrak. I think the map you may be referring to is Amtrak's map, which stops at Pueblo. And our commission was very upset with that because it did not depict our legislation, which says reroute the chief if possible through Pueblo and extend this service down to New Mexico via Trinidad and Raton Pass in New Mexico. So those concepts are in the legislation. They're pretty concrete. That's what we want to do. I agree with you entirely that this service won't be real and won't be what we want it to be unless we do run border to border. But I also recognize that those markets will cause those particular extensions probably to build later. But the legislation says start between Fort Collins and Pueblo because that's where the major market is now. And we've learned from other states that if you don't take that seriously, if you don't make your front end service popular with the public, it won't sustain itself. So if you look at Virginia, North Carolina, and California, and Oregon, and Michigan, and the other states, Illinois, for example, one of the senior engineer for the Illinois Chicago to St. Louis route is on my board at my advocacy group. We've looked at those particular routes and learned a lot about what will make this successful. We have to provide to the public both the NEPA analysis and a very comprehensive service development plan. Nobody's going to be in the blind when this district, if it is created, puts forth a ballot measure. They're going to see exactly what service they're going to receive, what stations are going to exist, and why they're important. And then they'll make a decision. 2/3 of the voting members of this district, if it is created, have to approve sending that ballot measure. You know, the internal thinking on the current commission is we want it to be 100%. You know, we settle for 2/3 because somebody's always going to object to. I've been involved in a lot of different large scale projects like this, and there are going to be objections. There's no doubt about it. We face them. You know, we've briefed last night. We heard from Greeley, and so 2/3 to me is a safe and secure measure to protect, you know, the taxpayers' interests. I hope I'm responding to you, Mr. Putman. I understand where you're coming from, and I told Greeley before the commission was formed, we helped obviously generate this legislation and the 2014 legislation and the 2012, you know, resolution supporting passenger rail, and we spent a lot of time talking to Greeley about the fact that they do have rail connections, and my vision, and I told it I mentioned it last night, is I think a lot of other communities are going to interconnect. I view this, I think Spencer mentioned this, but I view this as a spine running down the state, connecting bus staying services, connecting local transit services, and eventually connecting additional train services. This is exactly what's happening on the Southwest Chief Amtrak line now. You know, that's Amtrak is supporting extending that, using that as a spine and extending service from Kansas down to Oklahoma and through to Texas. I can see us extending service down to Albuquerque and obviously up to Cheyenne. So it's the beginning, and it's a long and expensive proposition, and we need to start somewhere, and we need to start with the best possible plan, or we'll fail. So that's where the commission stands now, and we hear loud and clear, you know, these issues, and we're trying to figure out how we might address those, but that's a political legislative issue. So I have to say, as I said last night, it's hard for us as a commission to get too engaged on that political side. We just forward whatever we hear to the legislature. And then it's been very successful so far. As I mentioned, different communities have brought their issues to bear, and the legislature has been very responsive based on, well, just yesterday, as I mentioned, we had 2 entities that were not happy, suddenly said, no, we endorse this. So we're working on that, and I can't pledge anything on the Greeley situation other than that we'll make sure, and I know Greeley intends to make sure that people are aware of their view.
Kyle, I think I see your hand.
Great. Yeah, thank you. James and Spencer, thanks so much for this. Super helpful. And along with Gene, very much in favor of figuring out how to get Front Range Rail going. I did want to follow up, though, on Gene's question. As I understand it, and I may have heard this wrong, but it sounds as though the proposed alignment follows the I-25 corridor, almost the entirety of the state, with the exception of, if I understand correctly, a piece from Longmont into Boulder and then back over I-25. Is that correct?
That's the Denver Union Station to Boulder to Longmont diverges from I-25, and that is correct.
And I think what I heard is that the rationale behind that is it the case that the right-of-way for that I-25 stretch between Longmont and Denver is actually smaller than it is for the entirety of the remainder of I-25? Or I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
No, the analysis I'm aware of from CDOT is that the center line, I was involved in that I-25 North and the I-25 North update, I guess we call it. And the issue CDOT raised was for safety's sake and to run trains at 90 to 100 miles an hour, which is what we're intending to do to be competitive. It's not impossible that we could run up and down the middle of the highway, but it would diminish the safety and the effectiveness of that route. I don't want to say anything more about it because I think CDOT should respond to that, and I can certainly get to Karen, their view. But in view of that, the problem, as I understand it, was you would have to then expand out beyond the current footprint and put the rail system on one or both sides of the highway. And that would be extremely costly and difficult to construct. And once again, our legislation to the commission was facilitate the development of front range passenger rail. So we looked at what particular right of way. There are 3 right of ways still under consideration. Let me make sure you understand that. However, the preference which the commission voted on is the freight right of way, because that's where we know we can get cooperation with. We'll already have a right of way that already can sustain the only pinch point on that is down around Palmer Lake south of Denver and through the Burnham Yard area in the south side of Denver proper. We're working, CDOT and RTD are working on acquiring the Burnham Yard right now, which will allow us to add passenger rail capacity to that right of way. That will be extremely important, obviously to Denver, but to the border-to-border service. It's going to be very important that we can run trains through it at relatively high speed, even in urban areas. So I think Mr. Putman mentioned these crossings and all these other issues have to be dealt with. There's no doubt about it, and that's expensive. But this right of way is the one we think we can get operating at least incrementally the soonest and start serving the public. We'll be very, I'm sure this district's, we added I-70 yesterday. I'm sure they're interested in getting service up into the ski areas and all the rest. We also help with the ski train. Annually, we work very hard to get that service resumed. So we're pretty familiar with working with Amtrak and working with these railroads on getting service established. It's just that it's darn expensive. We had to build a platform in Winter Park. It cost $3 million to build that heated platform in Winter Park, but we had to for safety reasons and because disabled folks go up there for the Disabled Winter Sports Center. And so, we just had the way to get them on and off. I'm sorry, Kyle, go ahead.
No, not at all. I appreciate that. I just wanted to follow up. And again, this is really helpful because I have to answer questions a lot of folks that I speak with from time to time. So I think implied with what you were saying is that there is a freight right of way that is feasible in all segments, notwithstanding the Palmer Divide pinch point, but in all segments of I-25, except for that piece that's between Longmont and Denver. Is that a fair?
Well, no, actually that is the right of way that RTD would like to use. It is the BNSF right of way. It was very controversial way back when. And the reason it was is the EIS proposed 55 trains a day. There's no other route in the country. And so I feel sorry for our colleagues on the commission from the BNSF railway. But so what did they say? They said, well, if you're going to run 55 trains a day, essentially that's more service than we provide to Chicago. It's going to be extremely expensive. Now, I did a large meeting on this in Longmont 2 or 3 years ago, and I had the legislative leadership up and I had the Boulder County up and all the rest. And it was so interesting that one of the main reasons that high number of trains, more than New York, any route in New York or Chicago or California, was you could get CMAQ funding, air quality funding. And so the idea was if you could build up the number of trains, you would, I used to serve on the Federal Air Quality Commission. And if this is mainly aimed at motorists, as you know it, but if you can reduce those emissions significantly, you can get money for, constructing new service. So I was sitting with one of the Senate leaders at the time, and they hadn't thought about how this, it was just stunning when BNSF got up and said, look, we run 26 trains in California and 25 in Chicago, whatever it is, and everybody was just stunned that we were proposing, 55. So that was BNSF made a huge mistake. They kind of fired from the hip with a very large amount of money. You may recall it was extremely controversial. The railroad, was beat up pretty severely by everybody. But, once you looked at that meeting in Longmont, it was just stunning. Once we really looked at what had been proposed and compared it to other services, it became apparent that, geez, that poor, how can you say that poor railroad? But anyway, the railroad was probably not too far off base to say, look, this is going to be extra. We're going to have 4 tracks. We have 3 in Chicago. We're going to have 4 to run as many trains as you're planning to run and continue to provide freight service. And, they serve the Anheuser-Busch plant. They serve a lot of businesses up and down this corridor too. So One thing the federal law won't allow is to impede their freight service. So you have to accommodate that. And obviously we intend to. Let me say one other thing so everybody knows this. They are being extremely cooperative with us right now. I think I mentioned this. We're having these very technical meetings on how would this service be developed. They are providing modeling. Now, obviously this is to protect their own interests, but they're providing very expensive modeling services for us so we understand what requirements might exist. And to the final decision on a route, this information is going to be very essential. So we understand what we're getting into and can we really feasibly provide the service. Yesterday I testified to the legislature. My final point was that this bill is positioning the state of Colorado. It doesn't levy a tax per se. It gives the authority to levy a tax. Some of those powers are important to convince the federal government and our own delegation, I might add, that they ought to pour billions of dollars into this project. So, I know it just doesn't work with taxpayers because all they see is, oh God, we're going to get taxed. But what we're doing, and I know that, I have a long, unfortunate career myself, and I know tax measures are extremely difficult to deal with. So we've built every safeguard in, but we have to prove to the feds that this state is willing to tax itself to match federal funding in order to build this. And so I think our legislature is courageous. One of my commissioners pointed that out to them to do this.
Thank you. Just one last question, and I promise I'll be quiet. And that is, given the alignment from Longmont to Boulder and then to Denver, is there in any future iteration of the plan some ability to extend a spur line or something that would go straight up that I-25 corridor and serve the area that Smart Commute is very much concerned about? Or is that pretty much, once that alignment's been established to Boulder, really Front Range Rail or any type of rail service other than the local RTD is probably not going to happen?
Well, this came up last night. One of the routes that didn't model effectively now, I should have mentioned this last night, I didn't. When you looked at it now, the Route 85, the 85 route didn't pan out very well. But this just happened in Virginia. They didn't go as far as everybody wanted them to go and everything else. But now that they're running an effective service, they just did a comparative analysis to extend their service in Toronto and found out they compared it to whether they ought to expand the highway system or build the rail system. And they chose to build the rail system. It was cost competitive and much more efficient in terms of its ability to carry people. This argument didn't carry weight with Greeley last night. And as I said earlier, I used to spend time in Greeley talking about the possibilities of rail service. But there's nothing on this spine that I don't see as possible if the market develops. But the market has to develop, and that's part of getting a system installed, and then all kinds of opportunities tend to arise. And the other thing is, if they don't arise and you've done it incrementally and carefully, you haven't unduly, cost the public. So we're being cautious, quite frankly. But it's still a large project. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Karen, are you there for any follow-up or?
Thank you, Joyce. I think it's interesting because at Highway 7 and I-25, Jim, and we've talked about this before, is we have modeled a mobility hub that we anticipated would eventually serve rail and could be similar to Denver Union Station on the north end. We have development on either side. We have Thornton and Adams County and Broomfield County, Erie, all of that converging there. And it's a nexus between the State Highway 7, Boulder to Brighton, and Fort Collins down into Denver. And so when we first heard this, of course, we anticipated that there would be a rail line down I-25, and that's what CDOT talked about in prior administrations. So I guess it's a shock to us initially that CDOT doesn't think it has the width of right-of-way in order to provide that. So I think that's what you're hearing from us. And then, I have to say Jessica's comments from the city of Thornton And probably Joyce from the city of North Glen and certainly Broomfield's concerned that they'll be imposed on a taxing district because they're within that footprint, but they won't get any rail service. And it'll be similar to what happened with RTD, where, you know, they paid into it for all these years and they really don't get anything. And regardless that rail investment lifts economic vitality, it doesn't lift it to the extent that it would if there was rail in that vicinity. Just being close by rail, a mile away or 2 miles away or 3 miles away or 10 miles away isn't, I see you, Gene, isn't adequate, I think, to ask our taxpayers to vote for this district. However, it'll be just like the RTD district in that if there's a majority vote to do this, I don't think those communities are going to be able to opt out. They weren't able to opt out of RTD. And when RTD passed, everyone gets taxed for RTD, whether they get services or not. So that's just the concern, but this is really great information. And I want to go on record as saying Smart Commute and the members of Smart Commute have always been in favor of regional rail. I think the issue becomes, you know, how it looks to us and what could we get out of that? Because our mission is to reduce congestion and improve air quality. And we believe the best way to improve air quality is to get cars off the road. And if we had rail service and if we had adequate transit service, we could get more cars off the road. And Kyle's development at Baseline, the McQuinney development, is working hard to do connectivity to bus rapid transit on State Highway 7 and would certainly work toward a rail station at Highway 7. Perlmutter development, same thing. So I think that's what we've got. But I think Gene wants to make some comments, and then I think we need to wrap it up so that we can have Gene Shreve give an update on our e-bikes. So please don't take our comments as, you know, being in opposition to what you guys are working toward at the state level. We are in favor of regional rail. Our issues are parochial. Thank you.
Thank you.
Since you made the statement that you've looked at going from La Junta over to Pueblo and then down, do you have a drawing or an alignment showing that occurring?
Well, we have a grant and we will, as Spencer can speak to, I don't want to use too much time and we can send more information to Karen and get it distributed, but we do have a federal grant. We are working with the Union Pacific and the BNSF Railroad to study the feasibility of a through car service from La Junta to Pueblo to Colorado Springs, turning in Colorado Springs and returning south. We were very excited about this because from the get-go, this was the beginning of Front Range passenger rail. Now we're talking about going on down to Trinidad, but if we could start getting passenger service, even just one train each way a day from La Junta on up, suddenly we've got a leg and we've got a model of how it might operate. So this grant will allow us to do a feasibility study with the railroad on how we would run that train, what safety require. It currently has coal traffic and, you know, slow traffic. There is one high-speed intermodal train that goes down through there, but we'll have a really good idea of how to run a service in the southern part of the state. And Spencer mentioned the other study plan we have with the BNSF and RTD is to look at how we run to the north and model how we would interact with the freight service and, you know, what impacts would that have on our ability to deliver service, or how much would we have to spend to make sure we could deliver service, which of course is what the taxpayers would want to hear and see. So, you know, this is why we went forward and announced publicly that we were looking at this route, because of the initial analysis showed it was the most favorable route economically, at least for the first stage of this service. And we did, and you know, we had received money to study this route in detail. We're having these meetings now, and I just felt as chair that it was just improper for us not to be totally transparent about what was happening here. Even though we don't have the authority to make a final decision, we do have the authority to make these recommendations. The legislature told us to do so. And so it's not without, as Karen has pointed out, she's been very clear about, you know, the position of Smart Commute on these very same issues. But I eventually think we're going to serve the entire state very effectively. And my biggest goal is to meet the legislative demand to get this service underway and prove that it can serve the state. And if it can't, then, well, I guess we'll suffer the consequences. But I think I'm an optimist. I think this is going to be very successful, and I think it is going to be a spine to a lot of service as the Front Range grows over time.
Can I just add, I know we're running out of time here, so I want to go very, very quickly. We broached the topic of Front Range Passenger Rail as a project going all the way to Trinidad with the Federal Railroad Administration. And they essentially laughed us out of the room when we said, hey, we want to run this train all the way from Pueblo. Trinidad, a city of about 5,000 with an additional 85 miles of track. And so we kind of adjusted our view to look at Trinidad and that connection to Pueblo as a Southwest Chief project. So really trying to enhance the service of the Southwest Chief instead of extending Front Range Passenger Rail. So all similar projects, but we just have to approach them in kind of a different way, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, and let me say one other thing, Karen, to close out. I shouldn't be speaking for CDOT. I'm not an employee of CDOT, so I'm just relaying information that I've been provided about, the I-25 right-of-way and the problems that came up. I was kind of aware of them because other states have had this problem. It's a natural thing to think about your interstate as the corridor where you're going to run rail. It doesn't happen very often if you're going to have a lot of stops and a lot of service back and forth. It does happen occasionally if you're going to run a high-speed train up and down the corridor without very many stops. I don't know quite why that is. I'm not an engineer, but anyway, enough said.
I appreciate that, Jim. And yeah, I hesitate to speak for CDOT as well. It's a moving target at CDOT. And so when I'm on this call, I'm really just representing Smart Commute. So we really appreciate it. Well, thank you, Spencer and James. I'll turn it back over to Joyce. I think we have one final thing, and I'm hoping people will be able to stay for us to hear Jean's, she's a very short presentation about our e-bikes grant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so
you.
much. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. Okay, next on our agenda is Jean Shreve, and we're going to talk about Colorado e-bikes grant. So,
Well,
Jean?
thank you, Joy. I appreciate that. So, hello, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Jean Shreve, and I am your program manager for the 144th I-25 Flex Ride service, as well as our new e-bike program that we officially launched on May 12th when we signed the contract with the Colorado Energy Office for the e-bike program. Now, I know our time is short, so I will try to run through this very quickly, but I want to just kind of set the stage for what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you an overview of the program, including what the framework looks like, give a high-level overview of what we plan to test and promote throughout this program. And then, of course, we're going to touch on the budget. To start, I want to just review a few of the acronyms and abbreviations that you're going to be hearing me state during this presentation and probably throughout the entire duration of this project ending September of 2023. The first abbreviation that I'll be using a lot is CEO, which of course stands for the Colorado Energy Office. But this becomes important since they are funding the statewide Can Do Colorado e-bike program. Now, connected with that, another acronym that is very important, as you see these e-bike programs hopefully get started and become successful programs throughout the state, is the acronym WAP. WAP is important because it stands for the Weatherization Access Program, which is the primary funding that CEO is using to implement these e-bike programs. And so what that means, because the WAP program is really to provide low-income assistance for people with energy costs, it becomes very important when we go out and look for participants that are eligible for our program, that they make 60% of the state median income. And so that's one of the requirements or criteria, if you will, that we'll be using as we select participants to be a part of our program. And then, of course, state median income, you're going to hear SMI a lot as the abbreviation for that. The other couple of things I just want to mention is you'll see on the slide, we mentioned NREL, I'm sure everyone knows that stands for the National Renewable Energy Lab. They have actually put together an app that all of our program participants will be using through the duration of the project to actually help us to track trip data and emissions reductions. So that becomes important. And then the last two that I think are important is I'll refer to Giant a lot. Giant is short for Giant of Centennial Bike Shop, which is providing our first 10 e-bikes for our Cycle 1 deployment, which I'll talk about here in a second. And so I just refer to them as Giant. And then the last one is Class 1. And I think this is really important for everyone to understand, because there are 4 different classes of electric bikes out there. And for our program, and for probably most of the programs throughout the state, we are purchasing Class 1 e-bikes, which essentially means that the electric drive system does not operate unless the person or the participant is pedaling. So we're not purchasing any throttle type e-bikes, which are classified as Class 2, or are Class 2 rather, but it's just the Class 1s, and that helps us stay in compliance with our state CRS code. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do is just kind of give you a rundown of what we have been doing since the contract was executed on May 12th. Carson, Tammy, and I have been feverishly setting up the programs, including the webpage, which if you go on the Smart Commute webpage right now, you will see the program live. That webpage includes basic information, frequently asked questions about the program, as well as the online application and the agreements that all participants will need to go through and sign to participate in the program. As the slide says, one of the things that we'll want to do is follow a set of criteria to be able to take all of the applications that we get and make sure that we hone in first for people who live in Adams and Broomfield counties, again, meet the state's requirement of the 60% of the SMI, that also have limited to no access to transit. And I think this is really important, that last criterion, because we don't want to take away riderships from the flex ride. So our catchment area, if you will, to begin with, will be about a 10-mile radius around the interchange and the employment center at 144th and I-25. But we're really going to try to use this criteria to select participants that have no transit at all or have a very long commute and have to transfer at least twice before they get to their work site. Now, once we have participants in the program, as it says on the slide, we're going to have the first deployment of participants, the first 10 e-bikes deployed, we're hoping at the end of June. And through this process, we're going to be setting up training, so they'll have adequate safety training and how to operate the e-bikes correctly. And we'll also be able to go on some test rides and make sure that they just feel comfortable as they start to use an e-bike as their primary mode of transportation. So the other thing that I think is really important is the note where it says that we're requiring a $250 deposit. Now, as it says, we do have some opportunities for some limited scholarships. I have been reaching out to some nonprofits as well as community churches. And so I have quite a few local organizations that are interested in underwriting these scholarships. So if we do have participants that are unable to afford the deposit, we should be able to have some scholarships in place to help alleviate or actually offset that cost to the participant. The other thing I just wanted to mention for the NREL app is, again, I mentioned a little bit ago, all of the participants will be using this to track their trips so we can calculate the air quality emission improvements. And I think the other thing that will be interesting that you'll see probably in the next month is there's a public dashboard that will show all of the data that's coming from all 7 of the programs. And I think we'll probably put a link to that on our webpage when the time comes, so people can kind of see how this program is advancing, not only for our Smart Commute area, but for also all of the other e-bike programs throughout the state. And then finally, we do have some incentives for the program. We have tune-ups, as it says, at the 1-year anniversary and at the end of the program. And so we're really going to try to engage people that are participating in the program on a weekly basis to make sure that they're comfortable, that if they are having issues with the bike or they need repairs, that they're reaching out to us and making sure that they understand that we're there to support them in making this transition from single occupancy vehicles to an e-bike so they can use this for their trips. So are there any questions in particular about this slide, or would you like me to move on to some of the things that we hope to test and promote? No? All right, well, Carson, if you can advance the slide. So as I mentioned before, there are 7 programs throughout the state that are being implemented through the CEO's program. And these are some of the items or elements, if you will, that we plan to test through our program. And I think it's important to let you know that probably one of the biggest advantages that we had was that we have this employment center at 144th and I-25 with the 10,000 shift workers. And so CEO really liked the fact that we have a very well-established network and relationship with our businesses there, that we have a very strong outreach to the workers in particular. And so they thought that that was a great advantage for us in terms of using this as a model of how you concentrate mobility options such as an e-bike at a suburban employment center. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be testing that I think will be really important. We also, again, as I mentioned before, we don't want to take ridership away from the flex ride. And so it really will be about targeting areas where we don't have transit already in the Adams and Broomfield areas. And then the other important thing that I think that I want to just highlight from this particular slide is that we do have the flexibility of trying e-biking without a long-term commitment. And one of the other things that CEO said about our program and how strong it was because we were doing a loan-to-own program. So because of this ability for participants to try it before they make this long-term commitment, it really will test that particular model, which I believe we're the only program in the state that's going to be using that particular model. So with those program areas that we plan to test, do you have any questions in particular about any of those? All right, well, Carson, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so along with our established network and outreach program that we already have at 144th and I-25, as well as the model loan-to-own program that we're using, the other, of course, big point that CEO really liked our program about was because we were able to leverage funds from our existing grant that we have for the flexible microtransit and mobility options at the interchange. And so this is another reason why we're actually doing 2 cycles of participants. The first cycle, which we hope and is scheduled at the end of June to deploy, those funds for those e-bikes are being paid for entirely by CEO funds. And what I'll need to do is I'll be starting to write in coordination with RTD, since they oversee our larger grant for 124th and I-25. I'll start to write the big package for the cycle 2, because we'll of course need to go out for a competitive bid process in order to access those funds. So that was another strong point in our particular application. And as it says on the slide, this is what the e-bike program under Smart Commute will pay for. So it's 2 cycles of e-bike deployment in up to 35 bikes. And we have, you might have seen on the slide at the bottom, we've actually put some budget aside for recumbent bikes or e-trikes. we wanted to make sure that we were highly inclusive of folks that may have physical challenges riding an upright bike. And so this was the fourth thing that CEO really felt strongly about our application, because we were the only applicant that actually included folks that may have physical challenges to upright bikes. So they really were appreciative that we included that in our program. And through the last couple of weeks in the outreach, I've actually been able to touch base with Thornton's Community Connections and their adaptive program. And so we're getting the word out to housing authorities, to workforce business centers, to the human service departments at both Adams and Broomfield counties, as well as our private sector participants, including Amazon Den 3. And I'm hoping to also reach out to St. Anthony North Health Campus and others at 144th and I-25. And I think I'll just end the formal presentation by saying that if we don't have, I don't see this happening, but if we do not have enough participants to fill 35 slots at 144th and I-25, we do have the flexibility of honing in on other suburban employment centers. Really, the criteria remains residents of Adams and Broomfield counties. You have to meet the 60% SMI. You have to work within our smart commute service area, and transit's not available. So really, in a nutshell, those are the 4 criteria that we're going to be used to implementing this program between now and the end of September of 2023. So with that, I know that was really quick, but I want to be cognizant of your time. So I'll just end there and see Joyce or Karen, if you want to open it up for questions, if we have time for that.
Sure. Are there any questions for Jean? I don't hear any or see any hands. Thanks for all your hard work, Jean. I know this has been really, quite involved with everything. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Joyce. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. So next we have, what do we have here? We have early planning for 2021 Transform.
Thanks, and thank you, Jean, for the overview. You encapsulated a whole lot of information in some quick slides, and it doesn't reflect the time and effort you put into this, or Carson or Tammy either. So appreciate that, and we'll come back to you frequently with an update to the board. We'll come back to the board with a frequent update as things start rolling along, but certainly we wanted you to have this information to pass along to others, or to ask how we can help your organizations as well. Joyce, the only thing I have really is just to say we anticipate doing a 2021 Transform in person. We're going to start looking for a venue. As I told you before, the Spaceport Colorado, I think, might be available to us. Commissioner Baca has suggested that. And we're thinking of a theme for this year. So we're open to suggestion. If anybody has a suggestion for what they'd like to see as Transform, please let us know. We'll work internally on some ideas. We've had some pretty significant transforms in the past. For those of you that are new to the board, we had the rail issue, the Front Range Rail, the N-line opening, Amtrak. I noticed Karen, I can't think of her name now, Headland, who was one of our guest speakers, is now in Biden's cabinet in a position. So pretty influential speakers. In the past, we've talked about autonomous vehicles. We've looked at a number of different things that are trending. And so if you can think of something that's trending that you think the Denver metro region would benefit from having Transform this year topic, please let us know. And with that, Joyce, that's all I have. I don't have anything else to add. I appreciate everyone's time today. I know it was a very lengthy program, but I thought it had some fabulous information, and appreciate all of you who hung in there, and also appreciate the ones that had to leave. So with that, Joyce, I'll hand it over to you to adjourn the meeting if that's appropriate.
We will do that. And again, I want to thank everyone for hanging in there and also participating in this. A lot of good information today. And I hope everyone has a good Memorial Day, and I adjourn the meeting. See you next month. Okay.
Thank you.